honored to be a part of this conference and to get a chance to speak on truth. So I figured I'd start with a verse that I know you're familiar with. In John 14:6, where Jesus says, I am one of the ways, one of the truths, and one possible life. Now, of course, you know, Jesus didn't say this, did he? In fact, there's at least 100 verses in the New Testament in which it is claimed that Jesus is the only way to get to God. Jesus seemed to think that truth matters for the way that we live. Now, in 2016, the word of the year was post-truth. We're told that truth isn't important anymore and it doesn't matter. So that's a good question. Why is truth important? I was speaking at a conference not long ago on the topic of truth, and this young man came up to me right afterwards, high school student. He goes, Dr. McDowell, you just gave this whole session on truth. Why is truth important? I said, well, do you want the true answer or the false answer? And he paused and looked at me, gave me a little smirk, and walked away, indicating that he got it. To even ask the question, why is truth important, we have to already assume that truth matters. Look, for the past few months, our country and world have been ravishing and working through this issue of COVID-19. One thing we've learned pretty clearly is that this disease does not care how we feel. The only way to defeat a virus like this is with truth. It's with truth. But the culture around us has changed. Years ago, my father, you'll recognize the name Josh McDowell, wrote the book Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And what's interesting is he jumped right into evidence for the scriptures, for the resurrection, and the deity of Christ. We updated that book recently. You know what we had to include? We had to include 3 specific chapters, defending and explaining and articulating not only why truth is important, but that we can know truth with confidence. And the reason is there's a lot of confusion today about truth. So here's an analogy that might be helpful. One of my favorite analogies is a beach ball. If you take a beach ball and you push it onto the ground, what happens? It pops back up because the nature of the beach ball, because of gravity, and it takes force to push it down. You see, when our culture says truth doesn't matter, or you can't know truth, or it's not important, it's kind of like pushing a beach ball underneath the water and it pops back up. Just like this young man who said, he asked me, why is truth important? But his question was like pushing the beach ball down. And when I reflected back to him something he intrinsically knew, it was like it popped back up. So we know truth is important, but let's be a little bit more specific. And I'll give you 2 reasons why truth really matters. Number 1 reason is because truth has consequences. Truth has consequences. My uncle's a pastor in Massachusetts, and he was telling me a story about a distant cousin of mine who would go walking on the train tracks every morning. But you see, this distant cousin of mine was deaf. And he got up one morning believing that the train was coming at the same time, but it never occurred to him that they would switch the times that the train came. Well, he was walking there thinking he was safe, couldn't hear the warning, train couldn't stop at time, and my distant cousin was killed because he had false information. Friends, truth can be a matter of life and death. A friend of mine I teach with at Biola wrote an interesting book recently called Immortal, and he lists all of these people in the book who were so-called health experts who died young. So Lucille Roberts, a health guru, died at 59. Grape Nut spokesman Ewell Gibbons died at 64. Long-distance runner Jim Fox died after a run at 52. Juice fasting advocate died of a stroke at 64. And an author by the name of Henry Lodge wrote a book called Younger Next Year, Live Strong, Fit, and Sexy Until You're 80 and Beyond. Died of pancreatic cancer at 58. Friends, the point is, if we believe something that's false, there can be big consequences for our life. This is why Hosea the minor prophet said, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." Truth has consequences, but there's a second reason why truth matters. It's that truth is a compass for life. Truth is a compass for life. A number of years ago, my mom had trouble with her email account. She got a new email account, was setting it up herself, and one of the messages that popped up on the screen said, "Close all the windows." And my mom's giving me permission to share this. She got up from her computer, walked around the house, and closed all the windows in the house. Now she came back and my sister asked her what she was doing. She explained to my sister. My sister fell on the floor and started laughing, almost crying so much. She thought it was so funny. Now what happened? My mom took literally what it said, but didn't understand the purpose and meaning and significance of the computer. You see, if we're confused about how a computer works, what's going to happen? It's going to lead to frustration, embarrassment, and anger. But it's when we know the design or the purpose of a computer, the truth, so to speak, and use it accordingly, that we're set free. You see, truth not only helps us avoid consequences, but truth brings freedom. We can only be free when we know truth and orient our lives in light of it. That's why it's always fascinated me. The first truth we're told about God in the Bible is not that God is love, not that God is holy, not that God is just. But the Bible starts by saying, in the beginning, God created. Because if God has created us, there's a purpose for our lives, how we're supposed to live. And we're only truly free if we know that purpose and live accordingly. So there's a purpose for language, there's a purpose for nations, there's a purpose for marriage, and there's a purpose for sex. It's when we know that truth and orient our lives to that truth that we're set free. That's what I think. I'm a professor at Bible, but I teach high school part-time. I actually think one of the biggest lies this generation is tempted to believe is a lie about freedom. That freedom is doing whatever you want to do, then you're set free. Friends, this is not freedom. This is not freedom. Some time ago, I was speaking at a Christian school with kids who were juniors and seniors, so 17, 18 years old. And they had been in Christian education and church their whole lives. And I walked up to the board and I wrote down, I said, I want you guys to describe to me the person who you would define as being truly free. What does it mean to be a person who's free? They talked amongst themselves. They came back to me and they said, the free person is someone who can do whatever they want to do. I said, okay, if God exists, would that in any way change what we mean by freedom? These students went back, talked amongst themselves, came to me and said, yeah, if God exists, now freedom is doing whatever you want to do, but now there's consequences. In other words, all God adds to the idea of freedom is consequences in this life, maybe guilt, or maybe get in trouble, and judgment in the next. That's it. Can you see how deeply these young people were shaped by a secular worldview? So I said, I want you to describe for me the person who's most free. And the students said, and they all agreed, the most free person would be somebody who's on an island alone so nobody could stop them from doing whatever they want to do. And through discussion, I helped them to realize that if the Bible is true, freedom's not just doing what we want to do. Freedom is living according to our purpose. And the Bible says we're designed to be in a relationship with God and a relationship with other people. So ironically, if Christianity is true, and there is truth and purpose in the world, then that person on the island is the least free. Friends, truth matters because number one, it helps avoid consequences. But number two, truth brings freedom. In fact, this is in part why Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Now let's pause for a second since we're talking about truth and actually define what we mean by this. I actually will spend with my high school students, sometimes I'll spend days unpacking it so they really grasp it. But I think if you follow with me through this definition, this will serve you well. So what do we mean by truth? Philosophers have a fancy definition that they use. But really all we mean is something called the correspondence theory of truth. That a statement is true if it matches up with reality. So if you have a belief or make a statement, and the world is the way you describe it to be, then your beliefs are true. If the world is not the way you describe it to be, then your beliefs are false. So for example, if I told you that this morning I went out for a drive in Southern California where I live in my new red Lamborghini. Now, if you go walking outside my home or I take the camera out there and show you and you see a red Lamborghini, my statement just might be true. Now, if you walk outside and it's yellow, my statement would be false because I described it as red. If you walk outside and see the car I really drive, which is a Ford Fusion, my statement would be really false. See, this is all we mean by truth. If I make the statement it's raining outside, and we go look and see and it's raining outside, my statement is true. If not, it's false. This is all we mean by truth. Now my guess is while you're listening to this, you're kind of sitting there going, you know what? This is actually kind of obvious and intuitive, and it is. Everybody uses this kind of truth. It's inescapable. Now the Bible doesn't define truth this way. When the 9th commandment says don't lie, what does it assume? Don't intentionally misrepresent the truth. So we can't not use this definition of truth. But here's the catch. As soon as the topic shifts to issues of morality or to issues of religion, many people will change what they mean by truth. So let me break this down and explain in a way that I think may be helpful. Imagine I asked you your favorite flavor of ice cream. I do this in audiences and people shout out Rocky Road and sherbet, even though sherbet's not an ice cream, vanilla, chocolate, etc. And then I'll stop, I'll say, you know what, you're all wrong. The best flavor of ice cream is chocolate peanut butter crunch. And then I'll look at the audience and I'll say, imagine I'm doing this with you. I'll say, how many of you say that's true? Some hands go up. How many of you say that's false? Other hands go up. And then my question is, how can you say the statement, chocolate peanut butter ice cream is best, can be true for you or true for me, but not true for you? How can that be my truth, but not your truth? And the answer is because we're talking about something we call a subjective claim. You see, subjective claim is a preference claim that depends upon somebody's feeling or opinions or preference. That's it. In fact, the key word in subjective is actually the word subject. The person believing something makes it true for him or her. So ice cream preference is a subjective claim. So when you think of subjective claims, I want you to think of ice cream. But what if I said, chocolate peanut butter ice cream controls diabetes? Could that be true for me, but not true for you? Now, of course, I think you realize this is a very different kind of claim. This isn't a subjective preference claim that can be true for me and not true for you. This is now an objective claim about the way the world works that is either true or it's false. You see, subjective claims are internal to the person who believes them. Objective claims are about the external world that are true or false. So imagine I had a big scoop of ice cream here and I said, this ice cream is delicious. Now, I think if you reflect on it, you'd realize that that's not really a claim about the ice cream. That's a claim about my experience of the ice cream. It's a subjective claim. Now, if I said this ice cream weighs or is say 25 grams, now that's not a claim about my subjective preference. That's a claim about a property that ice cream itself has. So subjective claims are like ice cream. Objective claims are like insulin. So preference subjective claims, when you think of ice cream. Objective claims about the world, think of insulin. Now here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put some statements out here that I've written down. And I want you to either write down or say out loud. If you're alone, you can shout it. If you're in a group, you can say it out as loud as well. I want your knee-jerk reaction. Whether these claims are subjective claims, then instantly write down or say or think ice cream, or if they're objective claims, I want you to do the same with insulin. So this is a test to gauge if you're grasping the difference between objective and subjective ice cream and insulin. Now, one important qualifier. I'm not asking if these statements are true or false. I'm simply asking what kind of claim are they? If it's an objective claim, write down insulin. If it's a subjective claim, write down or shout out ice cream. All right? Let's give it a shot. Ice cream or insulin? Coke tastes better than Pepsi. I think you realize right away that this is a preference claim. You might not like Coke or Pepsi, but to make that claim depends upon somebody's feelings. Coke tastes better than Pepsi is an ice cream claim. How about Diet Coke has less calories than regular Coke? Now I think you realize this is an insulin claim. This isn't a matter of preference. This is a claim about the ice cream itself, an objective claim. All right, how about action movies are more enjoyable than romances. Now, some of you guys might be pausing going, that's insolent, but I think if we're honest, we realize that that's a preference claim. You might like action movies, you might like romances, you might rather read a book, but that is a preference claim like ice cream. Here's another one. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Now that's a mathematical claim, isn't it? I think quite obviously probably all of you thought or said insolent, and you're right. Mathematical claims are about the objective world independent of what we think. Good. How about another one? George Washington was the first president of the United States. Now this is not a mathematical claim. This is a historical claim. Now that claim is not a matter of preference that can be true for you but not true for me. That is a claim about history, the way things were, the real world. So I think you would agree with me, when I do this with audiences, almost everybody agrees, that historical claims are like insulin. Let's try another one. A rose is beautiful. Now my guess is quite a few of you thought, that's a matter of ice cream. I don't have time to develop this, but I would argue that a rose is intrinsically beautiful. And if you don't think a rose is beautiful, you are just as wrong as if you think 2 plus 2 equals 5. Now, I don't have time to defend that, but think about the way we use beauty and what it means that God is beautiful and has made a world with beauty. And I think you might agree. But let's keep going. Ice cream or insulin? Sean can bench press 300 pounds. Now, of course, at this point, some of you are probably smirking a little bit thinking, yeah, no. But here's the deal. Do you know how many pounds I can bench press? And the answer is no. You don't know how many pounds I can bench press. Now, you might have a good guess about it. But to answer whether this is ice cream or insulin, you actually don't have to know. Why? Look, think about it. We could throw some 45s on, cut off my sleeves, and see if I can do it. But there is a truth about whether I can do it, that your beliefs don't change. Either I can bench press, or I can't bench press 300 pounds. You see what the point is? This is an objective claim, independent of what you think about it. So if I said there's 50 quadrillion zillion atoms in the universe, we will never be able to test that. But that is still a claim about the objective world that's either true or false. So I think you would agree with me, this is like insulin. So far you've probably agreed with me that historical claims are like insulin. Mathematical claims are like insulin. How about this one? Abortion is wrong. Abortion is wrong. Now obviously I can't hear your response, but when I do this with audiences, especially students, 50% is an exceptional number. Normally it's 60, 70, 80% of the audience immediately shouts out ice cream. Now the claim that abortion is wrong is not a scientific claim. It's not a historical claim. It's a moral claim. Are moral claims matters of preference like ice cream flavor? Or are they matters of objective truth like 2 plus 2 equaling 4? Now I want you to imagine for a minute that all moral claims were like ice cream. Could you judge anybody for doing anything wrong if moral claims were like ice cream? And the answer is no. You couldn't judge people who intentionally spread COVID-19 to others. You couldn't judge some of the chaos going on in the Middle East and acts of terrorism. You couldn't judge anything from the Me Too movement about how some people had been taken advantage of sexually. Friends, if morality is like ice cream, we can't judge anything as being objectively wrong any more than I can say you're wrong to not like chocolate peanut butter ice cream. You see, not long ago I had a conversation with a friend about the topic of abortion, and he goes, look, if you don't like abortion, don't have one. And because I'm a smart aleck sometimes, I said, you know what, sorry to point out the obvious, but I can't. Now you notice what he's doing. He said, if you don't like abortion, don't have one. He took the issue of abortion and act as if it's a matter of preference. If you don't like chicken, get the fish. If you don't like coffee, get tea. If you don't like abortion, don't have one. So I asked him a question because one of my mentors encouraged me to do this, Scott Klusendorf. He said, ask somebody this question. I said, are you against racism? He says, of course. I said, then if you're against racism or against slavery, then don't own a slave. Now he kind of looked at me like I was crazy. Now what was I doing? I was taking this issue of slavery, which he knows and believes is objectively wrong, and shifting it into the realm of preference. And that's where he stopped and said it's wrong. You see, friends, here's the reality. We all know that morality is not like ice cream. It's like insulin. And you think, how can I make a statement like that? Number one, Romans 2 tells us that even people without the law know there's a moral law because it's written on their hearts. Everybody knows there's right and wrong. My dad put it to me this way one time. He said, son, you know what someone believes about morality? Not by what they say, not by what they do, but by how they want to be treated. In fact, Frank Turek famously says, you know someone's beliefs about morality not by their actions, but by their reactions. I often tell my high school students that I teach, I'll say, if someone tells you there's no such thing as objective morality, cut in front of them in line. What are they going to say? That's not fair, that's not right, as if there's a standard outside of them that they know exists and we're supposed to follow. You see, certain worldviews, atheistic worldviews and others, will say there's no objective morality. But even atheists live in God's world, and they're made in God's image. And so this belief system is like pushing the beach ball down, but in their lives that truth pops up. A number of years ago, I heard about this club that was in my town. I was teaching a private school full time. It was a public school. And these students started this atheist club, and 100 students showed up to it. So 3 of my students went. They came and were like, what should we do? We came up with the idea to challenge 3 of their students to a debate. So we had a debate: historical Jesus, evolution, and intelligent design, and morality. One of my students got up there and said, we know there's a moral law. We know there's right and wrong because there's a moral lawgiver. Morality points to God. One of the skeptical students got up there and said there is no objective moral law. It's all subjective, like ice cream preference. Therefore, you shouldn't judge anybody else. We live according to our standards. And he sits down. A few minutes later, it's time for the closing speeches. And the student who just said morality is like ice cream, essentially, gets up there and uses his audience, his opportunity to have an audience in a church. And he looks at Christians and he goes, you're bigoted, you're hateful, you're homophobic, and you're intolerant. Shame on you. Do you see the irony? One moment ago, he said there's no right and wrong. But then he started condemning Christians for being immoral because he's made in the image of God. Friends, I am certainly not trying to imply that abortion is the unforgivable sin. If you had an experience of that, please know that God loves you and God forgives you. But either the unborn is human or it's not human. Either we have a right to take life or we don't. We may have opinions about that, but our opinions no more change that than they change 2 + 2 being 4, or George Washington being the first president of the United States. Now, let me ask you a couple more ice cream or insulin and then we'll wrap this up. How about Jesus was a carpenter? Of course that's insulin. Even if it turned out he was a blacksmith and we interpreted the Bible wrong, you know that's an insulin claim. Well, how about the claim that Jesus resurrected as proof that he's divine? Now this is a historical claim that has theological implications. Is that ice cream or is that insulin? Now my guess is at this stage of the talk, most of you thought insulin, and I think you'd be right. But realize something. This is very important when we talk about Jesus being God. That nobody dies and goes to hell just for not believing in Jesus. You realize that, right? Nobody dies and goes to hell just for not believing in Jesus. People die and are separated from their Creator for eternity because a rebellion against their Creator, because of a moral virus the Bible calls sin. And to say that Buddha or Krishna or Joseph Smith or Muhammad or any other religious figure can forgive your sins is like saying chocolate peanut butter ice cream controls diabetes. It doesn't work in the objective, real world. Why is Jesus the only way? Because Jesus is the only one who paid for sin. You see, if my car breaks down and I'm out of gas, it doesn't do any good to rotate the tires, fix the transmission, or to get new spark plugs. I have to identify the problem, and I have to fix it. The problem is God is holy and God is good in his character. And sin separates us from a holy God. And Jesus is the only one who fixed the problem. That's why Jesus is the only way. But what's unique about Christianity, it's not a story that merely somebody holds like a philosophy. It's a belief system we can investigate. See, if you were there with Thomas when he doubted, you could have reached out and touched the spear wounds in the side of Jesus. If you're there at the cross, you could reach out and touch the cross and got a splinter on your hand and felt the trickle of warm blood coming down. If you were at the empty tomb, you could have ducked your head under, smelled the scent of a musty tomb, and seen the linen cloth of Jesus laying there. Friends, you might believe in Christianity, you might not. But the claims of Jesus are not the kind of claims that can be true for you, but not true for me. Jesus didn't say, I'm one of the ways, one of the truths, and one possible life. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And no one gets the Father but by me. Friends, truth matters. It's only when we know and we live and we proclaim truth that people can experience real freedom. Let's do that together.